I hadn't planned on staying long. That was the lie I told myself as I stood on the front porch, fingers tightening around the thin folder of documents like it could anchor me to something solid. The house looked exactly the same as it always had, white, paint just beginning to yellow at the edges, wind chimes clicking softly in the afternoon breeze, a welcome mat that said bless this home, even though I was pretty sure no blessing had touched it in years. I knocked once, lightly, as if that would somehow soften what I was about to step back into. The door opened, and there she was, my ex-wife, already distant, already elsewhere. The exchange was brief, polite in the way strangers are polite when they share too much history. She took the folder, flipped through the papers without really looking, and told me her mother was inside if I needed anything. Then she disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I stepped in. The air smelled the same, lemon cleaner and old furniture. The ticking wall clock immediately caught my attention, each second sounding louder than the last, as if time itself was impatient with me for returning. I stood awkwardly in the living room, unsure where to put myself, unsure what version of me belonged in this space now. Not the husband, not quite the stranger either. I was reaching for my keys, already preparing my exit, when I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I was wondering when you'd come back. Her voice came from behind me, smooth and unhurried. I turned slowly. My ex-wife's mother stood near the doorway that led to the kitchen, perfectly composed, as though she had been placed there intentionally. She wore a dark blouse, sleeves neatly pressed, silver bracelet glinting at her wrist. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes were sharp, taking me in from head to toe like she was updating an old mental file. "Hello," I said, forcing a small smile. "I was just dropping off some paperwork." "So I see." Her gaze flicked briefly to the folder, then back to my face. Funny how many times paperwork brings people back into rooms they swore they'd never enter again. I gave a short, humorless laugh. "I won't be long." "You never are," she replied. And there was something layered in the way she said it. Not accusation, not kindness either, just observation. She moved closer, heels tapping softly against the wooden floor, and I became acutely aware of how small the room suddenly felt. She stopped a few feet away, arms folding loosely across her chest, head tilting just slightly as she studied me. "You look thinner," she said. "Divorce will do that." "I've been busy," I replied. "Busy running or busy healing?" The question landed harder than I expected. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, realizing there wasn't an answer that wouldn't invite more scrutiny. She smiled at that, not a warm smile, but a restrained one, the kind that suggested she already knew the answer and was simply enjoying watching me struggle toward it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock kept ticking. Somewhere deeper in the house, a floorboard creaked. Then she stepped closer. One deliberate step, then another, close enough now that I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the confidence etched into her expression. She smelled faintly of lavender and something sharper beneath it, a scent that made memories stir against my will. Family dinners, quiet judgment across the table, the sense that she had always seen more than she ever said. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the hallway, then back to me. That was when her lips curved upward. The smirk. It was subtle, quick, but unmistakable. A private expression meant only for me. She leaned in just enough that I instinctively held my breath and lowered her voice. "Want to look?" The words were barely above a whisper, but they echoed in my head like a shout. My mind froze completely. Thoughts tripped over each other, scrambling for context, for meaning. A look at what? Why now? Why me? "I what?" I managed, hating how uncertain my voice sounded. Her eyes sparkled with amusement, as if my confusion was precisely what she'd been hoping for. "Oh," she said softly, "you always did need things spelled out." A knot formed in my chest. "I don't understand." "You never did," she replied lightly, straightening just a little. "That was part of the problem." She glanced toward the hallway again, longer this time, then back at me. The smirk returned, slower now, deliberate. "Want to look?" she repeated. Every alarm bell in my body went off at once. This felt wrong, not dangerous exactly, but destabilizing. like standing on a floor that suddenly revealed itself to be thinner than you thought. At what? I asked again, though some instinct warned me I didn't actually want the answer. She chuckled quietly, shaking her head. Still careful with your words. That restraint never saved you, you know. Before I could respond, she turned away from me, already moving down the hallway. No explanation, no invitation, just the assumption that I would follow. She didn't look back. I stayed where I was, heart pounding, palms damp. My brain screamed at me to leave, to grab my keys, open the door. Escape before this turned into something I didn't understand and couldn't control. But curiosity pressed in just as hard. What look? What game was this? And why did it feel like she had been waiting for this moment? My feet moved before my mind fully agreed. Each step down the hallway felt heavier than the last. The walls seemed closer here, the light dimmer. I watched her back as she walked ahead of me, unhurried, confident. Like someone leading a guest through a house, she ruled completely. She stopped in front of a door I had never opened before, and reached for the handle. My pulse thundered in my ears. I froze. The moment she touched the handle, something inside me tightened, like a warning bell I'd ignored too many times in my life. The door was old, darker than the others in the hallway, its brass knob worn smooth by years of use. I realized then that despite all the time I had spent in this house, there were still rooms I had never been invited into. That thought alone unsettled me more than whatever waited on the other side. She opened the door slowly, deliberately, as if she wanted to give me one last chance to turn around. I didn't. The room was smaller than I expected. A narrow study tucked away like a secret. Sunlight filtered in through a single window, dust floating lazily in the air. The smell was different here, paper, old wood, and something faintly metallic, like ink that had soaked too deeply into pages to ever fully dry. For a heartbeat, nothing made sense. Then I saw the wall. It was covered, floor to ceiling, with photographs. Not arranged chaotically, not carelessly pinned. Each one was placed with intention, aligned in neat rows and columns. Frames of different sizes but similar tones, black, brown, muted gold, creating a strange, quiet harmony. My eyes struggled to take it all in at once, darting from image to image, searching for something familiar, something grounding. And then recognition hit me. That was our wedding day. I stepped forward without realizing it. The photo caught us mid-laugh, her head tilted back, my hand resting at her waist. I remembered that moment, or at least, I remembered the version of it I had told myself for years, that it had been perfect, untouched by what would come later. My gaze moved to the right, a holiday dinner. My ex-wife seated at the table, eyes bright, fork frozen mid-air as she laughed at something I must have said. In the corner of the frame, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was me, half turned away, attention already drifting. Another photo. A birthday? Candles lit, a wish being made. My hand on my phone. Another, a quiet morning. Coffee cups on the counter. We weren't touching. My chest tightened with each step I took deeper into the room. These weren't just memories. They were moments I hadn't known were being collected, observed, preserved. I watch people, she said behind me. Her voice was calm, almost gentle now. Not teasing, not sharp. I always have. I turned slightly, enough to see her leaning against the door frame, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She wasn't looking at the wall. She was watching me. Why? The word came out rougher than I intended. Why do you have these? She pushed herself off the frame and stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. The soft click felt louder than it should have, because people tell the truth when they think no one is paying attention, she said. Smiles lie. Bodies don't. She gestured toward the wall. Look closer. I didn't want to, but I did. I noticed patterns then. How often I was positioned slightly away from my ex-wife. How my shoulders angled out of conversations. How my eyes were frequently elsewhere, toward a television, a window, a doorway. In contrast, she was always turned toward me, leaning in, waiting. There was a photo near the center that pulled me in, almost against my will. We were sitting on the couch, no special occasion, no guests, just the two of us in the living room, evening light slanting through the window. She was curled slightly toward me, hopeful. I was staring straight ahead, jaw tight. hands clasped together like I was bracing for impact. I stared at it longer than the others. "That one," her mother said quietly, stepping up beside me. "That's when it ended." I swallowed. "No, we didn't even start fighting until years later." She shook her head. "Fighting isn't the beginning of the end. Silence is." I felt exposed, like the photo had stripped something away that I had spent years carefully layering over with excuses and justifications. "You were already gone," she continued. "Not physically, but emotionally. You had checked out. You just didn't have the courage to admit it yet." I exhaled slowly, my breath shaky. "Why show me this now?" She studied me for a moment before answering. The smirk was gone. What remained was something steadier, sharper. "Because you froze back there," she said, "when I whispered to you." I frowned slightly. "What does that have to do with this?" "Everything," she replied. "You freeze when you're confronted with truth. You freeze when a moment demands bravery." She turned toward the wall again, pointing to another photo, this one taken much later. Papers on the table, tension in the room, my ex-wife's eyes red, my face closed off, distant. "You froze then too," she said. "Instead of fighting for clarity, you chose comfort, distance, detachment." I felt something crack in my chest, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet fracture. "I'm not saying you're a villain," she went on, her voice steady. "You didn't mean to hurt her. Most people don't." She finally looked at me directly. "But you weren't brave." The words settled over me, heavy and undeniable. I stared at the photographs again, seeing them differently now. Not as accusations, but as evidence. A timeline of small withdrawals that had eventually emptied everything out. She moved past me, opening the door again. Light spilled back into the hallway. "I smirked," she said without turning around, "because I knew you'd assume the worst. You always do. But I didn't want to show you something scandalous." She paused, hand on the knob. "I wanted you to look at what you lost," she said softly, "and what you didn't deserve to keep." The door opened fully. I walked past her, my legs unsteady, my thoughts louder than my footsteps. When I stepped outside, the evening air hit my face like a quiet mercy. I inhaled deeply, trying to ground myself in the present. Behind me, the door closed. There was no smirk this time, only the echo of being seen completely, uncomfortably, and finally honest with myself.